Hello and welcome to Take From It What You Will. I will be reviewing primary source documents relating to issues of current interest to the everyday public. Today what we're going to review is the Keystone Pipeline Project. It's called Keystone XL Pipeline Project. This is a project that has been mentioned a few times by several politicians, and it is right now awaiting presidential confirmation or a presidential denial. It is a permit application, and I'm going to review today the final supplemental environmental impact statement. This statement was prepared by the U.S. Department of State, Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs. I have it sitting right here. It is the final supplemental environmental impact statement for the Keystone XL project, the executive summary prepared and submitted to the President January 2014, applicant for presidential permit, Trans-Canada Keystone Pipeline LP. Trans-Canada Keystone Pipeline LP is the company that wants to build the pipeline. We're going to go over a little bit of history on this. I have the document right here. You can download this from the State Department. Now there are a couple of documents there. We're going to go through the final executive summary of the final document. It's about 45 pages long. Very readable document. I encourage everyone to go to the State Department site and download this. This is the second document. There was an original environmental impact statement based on the initial project application. We're going to go through a little bit of history on this so you understand it. We should be able to do this fairly quickly as it's a fairly simple document. And recall that the Keystone Pipeline Project is to take oil sands generated crude oil from the border between Canada and the U.S. And take it to the Houston area where refineries would be refining it, or it could be shipped. It also includes the Bakken oil shale area in the Dakotas of the U.S. and allows some production from there to be added to this and sent to the refineries in Houston, or for shipping in Houston as well. So let's dig right into the document. As I said, it's for the Keystone XL project. Executive summary: Genevieve Walker, project manager, United States State Department, United States Department of State, Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, and out of Washington, D.C. And it lists the cooperating agencies, etc., and goes through the table of contents. I'm going to summarize a little bit on this. I, again, encourage you, get the document, read it, 45 pages. You can go through it fairly quickly, and again, we can do it. Let me give you an overview. Keystone XL Pipeline, the proposed project, is a proposed 875-mile pipeline project that would extend from Morgan, Montana to Steel City, Nebraska. Now most people think this is to go all the way to Houston. That was the original project. This one just goes to Steel City, Nebraska, and we're going to get into why that is in just a second. The pipeline would allow delivery of up to 830,000 barrels per day of crude oil from Western Canada, and the Bakken Shale Formation in the United States to Steel City, Nebraska, for onward delivery to refineries in the Gulf Coast area. Trans-Canada Keystone Pipeline LP has applied for a presidential permit that, if granted, would authorize the proposed pipeline to cross the United States-Canadian border at Morgan, Montana. The proposed route differs from the route analyzed in the 2011 final environmental impact statement in that it would avoid the environmentally sensitive Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality identified Sandhills region and no longer includes a southern segment from Cushing, Oklahoma to the Gulf Coast area. Why does it not include that? Because that's already been built. That does not, when they did the original study, what they saw was this area in Nebraska, the Sandhills region, was the one that really cropped up as the potentially damaging to an environmental sensitive area. So that's, in reality, that's kind of why everything got put on hold, because of that area. Remember, Nebraska had the big controversy, had to go through the courts, referendum there, and they finally approved that it could be in alternate. I'm going to show you the routes here and all that in just a minute, and finally approved that. In the meantime, because the initial application was actually in 2008, the final EIS by the State Department was published in 2011, and this, because it crossed the Sandhills region and went all the way to Houston, but that Sandhills region was the problem. No problem from south of there all the way to Houston. So what did Trans-Canada Pipeline, Keystone, what we call them, and I'll call them from here on out Keystone, that's the company. What they said was, well, okay, south of Nebraska, we're not crossing any borders, so all we need are the permits to build that. So they got the permits through Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, and that's built. It was completed a year ago, I think. So that portion is already built. Keep that in mind. That portion, the southern half, already done. All right. Let's go on. Presidential permit process. The proposed petroleum pipelines that cross international borders of the United States, the President, through Executive Order 13337, directs the Secretary of State to decide whether a project serves the national interest before granting a presidential permit. Interesting here. Remember this statement. Secretary of State to decide whether a project serves the national interest before granting presidential permit. To make this decision, the Secretary of State, through the Department, considers many factors, including energy security, environmental, cultural, economic impacts, foreign policy, blah, 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 goes through all this. This supplemental EIS was produced consistent with the NEPA and will help inform NEPA's National Environmental Policy Act, and will help inform that determination. Before making such a decision, the Department also asked for the views of 8 federal agencies, and it names those. If it is determined the project is determined to serve the national interest, it will be granted a presidential permit that authorizes construction. Applicant would be required to abide by certain conditions listed in the EIS and the presidential permit. The Department's primary role is to make a national interest determination. Its jurisdiction does not include selection of specific routes. In addition, the Department acts consistent with the National Historic Preservation Act and the Endangered Species Act as part of this comprehensive NEPA review. Then we go into a little bit of the background, which I've just given you really is the essential background. That is, initial application 2008, 2011, the State Department provides the first review of the entire project. That was actually attached to an act in Congress. Let me see if they have that here. A rider in Congress attached, where was that? Gosh, I know that's in here. Yeah. In late December 2011, Congress adopted a provision of the Temporary Payroll Tax Cut Continuation Act that sought, so this was a kind of a rider on there, that sought to require the President to make a decision on the presidential permit for the 2011 final EIS route within 60 days. That deadline did not allow sufficient time to prepare a rigorous, transparent, and objective review of such an alternative route through Nebraska. As such, presidential permit was denied. So they denied the permit. Because it didn't allow this. They found this fault. Everything goes back to the drawing board, and that's when Keystone decides, well, we don't need it for the bottom half. We'll build the bottom half. We'll work on this top half, this area in Nebraska that we have to get reviewed, all the other review, and bang, 2012 they supply this new application. Notice of intent on June 15, 2012 through notice of intent. The Department solicited public comments for consideration establishing the scope and content of the supplemental EIS, etc. So they go through all of this work, the supplemental EIS again, and the real issue here was this Sandhills area of Nebraska. Let me see. I believe I have some maps here. Let me see if I can get something and show you where these things are at. If you can look here, you'll see this is the route that it's traveling through, and it's traveling from the border down across this Sandhills route to the Nebraska border. Okay? The initial route ran right through the Sandhills. New proposed route avoids that area. That was it. This is the big change right here. Okay? So, public comments received. They went through, and they went through literally millions. I think 1.5 million comments received. Went through them all, and then did their analysis based on the comments as well as the requirement by law of how they have to do it. The way the project is described is it's going to be a buried pipeline. Let's see. The proposed project would consist of approximately 875 miles of new 36-inch diameter pipeline and related facilities for transport of the West Canada crude and Bakken crude from an oil terminal near Baker, Montana. Crude oil carried in the proposed project would be delivered to existing pipeline facilities near Steel City, Nebraska, for onward delivery to refineries in the Gulf Coast area. The proposed project would also include 2 pump stations, one new and one expanded, along the existing Keystone pipeline in Kansas. Construction of the proposed project would include the pipeline itself, plus various above-ground ancillary facilities, access road, pump stations, construction camps, connected actions. Figure ES4, well, you have to get this. Construction of the proposed project would generally require a 110-foot wide temporary right-of-way and is expected to last 1 to 2 years. After construction, the proposed project would generally maintain a 50-foot wide permanent right-of-way easement over the pipeline. It's a buried pipeline. They buried the pipeline in Montana, South Dakota, and Nebraska. Keystone would have access to property within the easement, but property owners would retain the ability to farm and conduct other limited activities within the easement. The permanent, they say limited, you don't want to do anything. You can't do anything that's going to damage the pipeline. Okay? The permanent above ground ancillary facilities would include electrically operated pump stations, mainline valves, and permanent access roads. Okay? And there's a lot of photos in here, diagrams in here showing where the pumping stations would be, etc., where the pipeline would go. They're going to and some of the requirements, etc., of this. I think one of the key issues to get out of this is there have been statements saying, well, this provides nothing for the U.S. That is, the U.S. oils are not allowed to be transported through this pipeline. Not really true. The Bakken crude out of the oil shales in South Dakota, when developed, will be able to be transported via this pipeline. And it's up to 100,000 barrels a day. Remember, total 830,000 barrels a day. This would allow 100,000 of that to come from the Bakken crude area. Right now, I believe they have commitments for up to 60,000, and that 100,000 would eventually come, obviously, based on oil prices, market conditions, etc. Some of the arguments seem to indicate that existing oil production, such as that produced in Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas, are not going to be allowed to be transported. That's true, but you would never do that anyway, because refineries accepting this quality of crude would not accept the quality of crude, which is a higher quality of crude that you get out of the regular pumped oil. This is oil that's extracted, in the case of the oil sands in Canada, in Western Canada, they're actually mined, heated, the oil extracted, and it's a different quality of oil than what's pumped in the Western U.S. But it's similar in quality to what is in the Bakken area of the Dakotas, in the shales of Dakotas, which would not necessarily be mined, would probably be steam treated and extracted directly through wells, but would have a similar quality to the oil that's being transported from West Canada. So this banding about that, well, we're not going to have U.S. oil transported through it. We are, when the Bakken is developed, but it's the quality of the oil that you have to see that has to be taken into account. Anyway, it goes through the market analysis and so on. I would say good to get in here, read this, and understand it. I'm going to kind of, this is, like I said, it's like 45 pages. This goes through a great analysis on the market, the oil market, etc. Remember, this was January 2014. Think of the oil prices that were going on then. This talks about the oil prices once dropping below $60, etc., $75. Let's see, what's the likelihood of the project being able to go forward, etc. Let's see, it says over the long term, lower than expected oil prices could affect the outlook for oil sands production. In certain scenarios, higher transportation costs resulting from pipeline constraints could exacerbate the impacts of low prices. Primary assumptions required to create conditions under which production growth would slow due to transportation constraints include what prices persist below current or most projected levels in the long run, and two, that all new and expanded Canadian and cross-border pipeline capacity beyond just the proposed project is not constructed. Above approximately $75 per barrel for West Texas Intermediate equivalent oil, revenues to oil sands producers are likely to remain above the long-run supply costs of most projects responsible for expected levels of oil sands production growth. Transport penalties could reduce the returns, etc. It goes through. Oil sands production is expected to be most sensitive to increased transport costs in a range of prices around $65 to $75 a barrel. Assuming prices fell in this range, higher transportation costs could have a substantial impact on oil sands production levels, possibly in excess of the capacity of the proposed project, because many in-situ projects are estimated to break even around these levels. Remember what our oil prices are today. The oil prices today are under $50. All right, so it's a matter of, you know, how long are the oil prices going to stay down. Now this gets into the economics of producing the oil sands. The oil sands have a huge infrastructure invested. So the fact that they may run at a loss for a few years while oil prices are down below this $65 to $75 level are offset by the huge investment they have. So they'll do things to mitigate those costs, such generally exploration, drilling, new well drilling costs, etc. Those are new resource reserve development drilling is terminated, cut short, or certainly reduced, and they try and save all the capital investment they can, so try and reduce operating costs as much as possible, and just kind of hang on until the prices go up. This is general and all-natural resources. No different in this kind of thing. So they're not going to just shut down just because for a year or 2 years even oil drops below $65 a barrel. They're going to be looking at the long term on this. So anyway, just to let you know. Now, I think getting into section 4 of this, the environmental analysis of the project, they do an excellent, all-out job on this. The greenhouse gases is the big thing, climate change. They go through the greenhouse gas changes to Earth's climate have been observed over the past century with a global temperature increase of 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit between 1880 and 2012. This warming has coincided with increased levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. In order for the Earth's heat and energy, and that goes through all the basics. There's a nice little greenhouse effect diagram here. Excellent. They've done a really good job on this. They really outline it. Greenhouse gas emissions associated with the construction operation of the proposed project's connected actions, a potential increase in indirect life cycle wells to wheels is what they call it, greenhouse gas emissions associated with the crude oil that would be transported, how the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the proposed project cumulatively contribute to climate change, and an assessment of the effects the future projected climate change could have in the proposed project area and on the proposed project. Goes through the economics, or the calculations, excuse me, of the greenhouse gases by all the oil that's going to be transported. Life cycle analysis to enable a more comprehensive understanding of the potential indirect greenhouse gas impact of the proposed project. It is important to consider the wider greenhouse gas emissions associated with crude oil being transported. What this is talking about, the life cycle, is what are the ancillaries? When they're in the construction period, you're going to have mobile equipment that's going to be running. You're going to have dozers. You're going to have excavators. You're going to have pickup trucks. You're going to have transport vehicles, bringing materials in, etc. You're going to have more power consumption because you're doing certain things that require power. You have man camp, and so etc. So all that information is all here. What all the greenhouse gases that are going to be emitted at climate change effects of the oil that's going to be transported during operations, right? Talks about also and after climate change, potential releases via pipeline, what the potential releases are. Goes through historical pipeline performance, the size of the spills, and really does a good job of statistically providing information on these types of pipelines and what kind of spills there are, and goes through the alternatives. Now, an important thing to remember here is some of this assumes that if the project doesn't go through, that's some of these impacts, the project does not go through, that the oil stays in the ground. That's what a lot of the impacts that are considered here are. The oil just stays in the ground. That is not likely to happen. It's not staying in the ground now. It's going to be transported. Currently, it's already being transported by rail through that same route. There are tons and tons of areas where they're transporting, or to Vancouver or to the east coast of Canada. So it's already being transported by rail. So pipeline, rail, that's kind of the scenario to keep in mind that we should be evaluating here. However, this does a really good job saying if that oil stayed in the ground, this wouldn't happen. Now let's look at the economic activity overview. During construction, the proposed project spending would support approximately 42,100 jobs, direct, indirect, and induced. Direct, indirect, and induced. Direct jobs are jobs Keystone hires, people who are installing the pipeline, doing the direct work on the pipeline. Indirect are the people who are supplying things indirectly, for the direct employees to use. The people who are selling them pipe, people who are selling welding rod, people who are selling them whatever, And then induced are the new jobs that come up because you got people there. Okay, you need to have more facilities to take care of these people. You need more restaurants. You need more hotels. You need places for these people to stay, that kind of thing. These are all induced. So they're looking at 42,100 jobs and approximately $2 billion in earnings throughout the U.S. Of these jobs, approximately 3,900 will be direct construction jobs in the proposed project area: Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas. Construction of the proposed project would contribute approximately $3.4 billion to the U.S. gross domestic product. The proposed project would generate approximately 50 jobs during operations. Operations, you got 50 jobs, permanent jobs. It doesn't seem like a big amount, but they're jobs. Property tax revenue during operations would be substantial for many counties, with an increase of 10% or more in 17 of the 27 counties gross. Property taxes, that's the big impact. The counties are going to get more property tax. They're going to have more taxes for schools, etc. Let's go. Jobs and earnings analysis recognizes three distinct components of economic activity and job creation: direct, indirect, and induced. Direct economic activity, indirect economic activity. I already went through those things. Let's go through this. This just really goes through more detail of what I was just telling you about. Then it goes through some of the impacts on water resources, surface water. It all really is dealing with the potential hazard of spills. These are and impact on flora and fauna. These are absolutely the proper thing that an EIS has to, the supplemental EIS, any EIS, has to address. You have to address these items, and these are the big thing you need to be taking account. These should actually be social and environmental impacts, direct impacts. So this does cover it. The potential for the hazardous material spills, what they could impact. You have to review what are the life forms. Are there any endangered species, etc. We'll get to that in just a second. And it does a very good job in here, and there's nothing untoward. This is what could happen. These are the impacts, and they statistically go through this very well. They've addressed it quite well. They show how the horizontal directional drilling would be used to place the pipeline away from water bodies. It wouldn't pass directly across or through water bodies, whether you're talking about rivers or lakes. It would actually drill underneath these, well underneath these, and this methodology is well established. It would avoid the wetlands, etc. So it goes through a list. Then it goes into the threatened and endangered species consultation. I just want to read this because I want to give you just this impact. Consultation and coordination with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service identified 14 federally protected proposed and candidate species that could be affected by the proposed. 11 federally listed, threatened, or endangered as defined under the ESA. 1 proposed species for listing as endangered, and 2 candidate species. Of the federally listed, proposed, and candidate species, the endangered American burying beetle, Necrophorus americanus, is the only species that is likely to be adversely affected by the proposed project. So there's one beetle that's called the American burying beetle that could potentially be impacted by this. This is a beetle I did a little bit of research on this, and just because it's a bug, there's no reason to poo-poo that. This is a carrion-eating beetle. They call it the gigantic carrion beetle, I think is one of the other names for it. It eats dead animals, eats carrion, eats flesh. It's kind of like a vulture kind of bug. And it has been reduced, according to what I've read, its habitat has been reduced down to about 10% of its original habitat in the U.S. Due to destruction of that habitat. That is development. Development has reduced that habitat. So that is an impact, and it has to be mitigated. Approximately 83 miles of the proposed project route in South Dakota would affect suitable American burying beetle habitat. Consultation between the department and US FWS resulted in development of conservation measures and compensatory mitigation, such as trapping and relocating beetles, special lighting restrictions. The beetles are attracted to light, and establishment of a habitat conservation trust. Even with these measures, the proposed project would be likely to adversely affect the American burying beetle, resulting in incidental take, such as unintended death or harm of individual beetles during construction or operation. The combination of Keystone's American burying beetle monitoring program and reclamation performance bond would provide assurances that the acres disturbed by the proposed project would be restored appropriately. The US FWS concluded in the 2013 biological opinion that the proposed project is not likely to jeopardize the continuing existence of the American burying beetle. Okay, so the US FWS that's the Fish and Wildlife Service, has worked with them and determined a method of minimizing the impact, and that proposed project is not likely to jeopardize the continued existence of the American burying beetle. Then it goes through geology, soils, general wildlife, impacts to wildlife, indirect mortality. These are not endangered species, it's just wildlife in general. And of course you have to minimize those. You want to keep animals away from this while you're doing the construction period. After construction, during operation, there's very minimal impact unless there's a spill, of course, and then that is when you would need to have mitigating measures in place. They do go in and explain in this generally how they try to minimize the potential for spills, how they would initiate cleanup of small, medium, and large spills, the installation of equipment on the pipeline, such as pressure sensors that would immediately stop flow, stop pumping, shut off the flow to the pipeline, and minimize the amount of spill. All this is technology that's in existence today and used all over the world. So that's I mean, it's not something that you want to avoid, but you want to read that. You want to see that that's in here, and it's here. Tribal consultation. Now, this is an important part because of the First Nations in Canada and the indigenous population of the United States. Upon receiving a new application, the department reached out directly to 84 Indian tribes throughout the U.S. with potential interest in the cultural resources potentially affected. Of the 84 Indian tribes, 67 tribes notified that they would like to consult or were undecided. All Indian tribes that participated in consultation were asked in 2013 to sign the amended PA. So tribal meetings were held in October 2012, May 2013, July 2013. Face-to-face meetings were held at the different, they go over the locations. In essence, they listed concerns, and there is a mechanism in place to address these concerns and to continue monitoring of these concerns. So it goes over alternatives to this. That is, alternatives if you don't build the pipeline. No action alternative. So detailed analysis was conducted on 3 broad categories of alternative to the proposed project, consistent with NEPA. The no action alternative, which addresses potential market responses that could result if the presidential permit is denied or the proposed project is not otherwise implemented. Major route alternatives, which includes other potential pipeline routes for transporting the oil, and other alternatives, which include minor route variations, etc. So they have the no action alternative means the thing is kaput. The president does not sign this. The no action alternative essentially means no pipeline. So it's going to be rail or rail and pipeline, because there's already, remember, half the pipeline's already built. So rail and pipeline. Under this scenario, the oil would be shipped via rail from Lloydminster, Saskatchewan to Stroud, Oklahoma, where it would be temporarily stored and then transported via an existing expanding pipeline 17 miles to Cushing, Oklahoma, where it would connect to the interstate oil pipeline system, which is what they've built. It goes on to what this would require: rail and tanker scenarios. This takes it to to Western Canada, Prince Rupert, British Columbia, where it could be loaded into Suez tankers for transport to Houston or Port Arthur. So that means, okay, you ship it over by train and by truck tanker. That's the rail and tanker scenario. To Western Canada, Prince Rupert, gets on a ship, goes down through the canal, I'm assuming, and back up to Houston from Prince Rupert. Or it comes from by rail down to Oklahoma, where the pipeline has already been installed and transports. Or you build the pipeline. All right. Or you could, and then of course you could rail it direct down to the coast, etc. There's other things. The thing is, the oil is going to go there no matter what. So that's what they're looking at all these alternatives. and they go through the summaries of all this. They go through alternative. They've done a very good job. Then they get into the comparison of alternatives consistent with NEPA and the CEQ regulations. The department compared the proposed project with the alternatives and that met the proposed project's purpose and need, and that were carried forward for detailed analysis and supplemental EIS. The alternatives carried forward for detail were, okay, this just describes those, the scenarios. The two pipeline alternatives compare different routes that meet the purpose and need of the proposed project, and the no action scenario describe the potential, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is just, and then it goes into disturbances, greenhouse gas, alternative comparisons. Excuse me. Greenhouse gas emission alternative comparison. Facilitate comparison of greenhouse gas emissions across all alternatives for operational GHG, greenhouse gas emissions. An assessment was made for all alternatives along the entire route from Alberta to the Gulf Coast. The direct emissions during the operations phase would be essentially the same as those generated by the project because they would have the same number of pump stations. Blah, blah, blah. During operation of all no-action rail scenarios, the increased number of unit trains along the scenario would result in greenhouse gas emissions from both diesel fuel combustion and electricity generation to support rail to terminal operations. The total annual greenhouse gas emissions, direct and indirect, attributed to the no-action scenarios range from 28 to 42% greater than the proposed project. That's the important part to get out of this. This last little paragraph there that's kind of sticking in there. Greenhouse gas emissions on the no alternative, the no action alternative, that is, no, we say no, are higher than if you build the pipeline. Important. That's important. Then it gets into the potential spill risk alternatives comparison. And this goes through the spill risk. It goes through, pipeline, tanker trucks, versus rail, the frequency, the quantity spilled during these. Excellent job, wonderful job. You can't exactly how you want something like this done. And then we get down to the last the rates of releases, the last paragraphs here, where they're summarizing this. The rates of releases and average size of release vary between modes of transportation. For instance, rail transport has more reported releases of crude oil per ton mile. Ton mile is ton of oil traveling in a mile. Than pipeline or marine transport, but overall, pipeline transport has the highest number of barrels released per ton mile. All right, so per ton mile, they have the highest release by pipeline. Per incident. That doesn't mean that has the most, it means per incident. Comprehensive data from 2010, blah, 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 blah. The number of barrels released per year for the no-action scenarios is higher than what is projected for the proposed project or the other pipeline alternatives because of the alternative modes of transport in the no-action scenarios. There. That's what you get to it. That's the meat of this part, is the potential spill risk. Lowest with the pipeline. Even though per ton mile you would have a higher quantity per incident, there are much fewer incidents when you're talking about pipeline as compared to tanker or rail transport. So overall, having the no action, that is the presidential denying the permit, would result in the likelihood of a higher quantity of spills, higher greenhouse gas emissions, higher spills. There is also a greater potential for injuries and fatalities associated with rail transport relative to pipelines. Adding 830,000 barrels per day to the yearly transport mode volume would result in an estimated 49 additional injuries and 6 additional fatalities for the no-action rail scenarios compared to 1 additional injury and no fatalities for the proposed project. Okay, that's using statistics, but it's more dangerous. Higher volume of spills, higher greenhouse gas emissions if the president doesn't sign this. Anyway, that's really the meat of the entire document. Now, I am not trying to influence anyone one way or another, but to me this is a pretty obvious document. The one thing that I think that we're not seeing in this document, which really surprised me, I've read it several times, which really surprised me. I'm going to go back to the beginning and read you something that I read before. For proposed petroleum pipelines that cross international borders of the United States, the President, through Executive Order EO 13337, directs the Secretary of State to decide whether a project serves the national interest before granting presidential permit. To make this decision, the Secretary of State, through the Department, considers many factors, etc. It doesn't do that. The final thing of any environmental impact statement should give a recommendation. Now, they go through and they say the no action alternative will have higher greenhouse gas emissions. They say the no action alternative, presidential denial of the permit, will have a larger amount of spills, will create more injuries and potential fatalities than having the pipeline. They miss that last step, which you want in one of these statements, and that is, what is the recommendation? They didn't make the recommendation, and that to me is a flaw in this document. Anyway, read through this. I encourage you to download this. Again, you can go to the State Department and download Keystone XL Pipeline project. It's on their website. The original is on there as well. I've done the executive summary. The full-on document is a huge document. It has all the backup material, etc., that you can read through. But this executive summary does a great job of looking that over. Again, I'm not trying to sway anyone one way or the other. I'm just trying to give you a review of the document as I see it, so that you can be well informed and talk to your congressman, talk to your executive office, talk to your local people about this project, and come to your own conclusions. But please get in touch with your representatives. They're public servants. They're there to do what you need. Get in touch with the executive office, as I have done on all these issues. Again, I'm trying to be objective. I don't want to give you an opinion on these things. Take from it what you will.